The Sustainable Voice, bringing you big successes from small places worldwide.
Welcome back to Sustainable Voice. This is your host, Ashish. I'm here with my co-host, Leigh. What's going on, Leigh?
Ashish, I'm excited. Happy to be back.
All
All
right.
good here.
I hear you were on this momentous road trip that kind of mimicked a Smokey and the Bandit story.
It did. My
Oh,
had a good time. Drove across the country this week,
yeah,
and
it's you and your husband. And
yes.
here's the question, because you're newly married. So here's the question. Is this road trip going to happen again, or was it like, I don't think we're there yet?
Well, he still likes me, although I did
Okay.
fly home and he continued on. But I think that was the
Oh,
best.
okay.
That was
So,
probably best for our marriage. So
all right. So he just said, go ahead and fly home. And then he said, 10-4, good buddy. Come on back.
come on back. That's right.
Well, last episode, we were talking about local archaeologists in Egypt, and we were talking about all these different elements. And, I love speaking to you about this because you bring a different element to it. I grew up traveling, and you grew up, we talked about the trailblazer you are in terms
Mhm.
of, with the Coast Guard and the expedition ships. And I was thinking about that and saying, there's trailblazers in every aspect of our life, right? So we talked about archaeologists last time. We've talked about other aspects, and this podcast is about big successes in small places. So we're talked about local heroes, people that don't make the front page.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, and we've talked about locally owned hotels, and we've talked about countries that go through unrest. We haven't really talked about guides.
Mhm.
And what better place to start that than in Egypt and just keep the conversation going there because it was so strong there. So I see that you're already back in the Valley of the Kings. So what you say that we just stay in ancient civilizations?
I'm here. I feel like we still got things to talk about with Egypt, so I'm glad that we're still on Egypt. And I just there's so much, and I think you're right. Guides are the really the secret sauce, and what brings any destination to life. And
Right.
that's finding a good one can be hard, and
Well,
people that have the passion.
yeah, and finding a good one and one that two parts, one that loves what they do and one that still loves what they do. Because I've guided a couple of groups myself, and I'll tell you, it's not an easy job. You
Mm-mm.
have to really love that job, and there's a fine line between guiding and babysitting. And the guide is that safety net, that person that everybody goes to. I've known guides who played marriage counselors. I've known guides who played therapists for kids. I've known guides who basically been photographer assistants, right? I mean, it just depends what's called for. And in certain countries, the guide, they fell on that career because something else didn't work out. But in the case of Egypt, Egyptologists in particular, not just regular guys, but Egyptologists in particular, they have a career path in mind. And it involves ancient civilizations, it involves antiquities, and it involves studying for multiple years to do this. And I would argue they're the creme de la creme in terms of guides. If I would take guides from all over the world, and there's some amazing guides that are out there, right? We have some amazing guides. We've talked, and some of them we might even have on this show at some point, this podcast at some point. But I would argue that the Egyptologists, specifically, when we're talking about that, they're cut from a different cloth. It's not that they're better or worse, but they're cut from a different cloth where the way they think is amazing. I've yet to see one that just reads from a guidebook or just recites. I've always found one that just reads, but I've also had experiences with a few that maybe weren't trying as hard. And,
Mm.
and and the question then becomes, is it because they're not as good? Or is it because they've lost their lust to be a guide? Is it because they've lost that passion? I don't know. I was just at a conference yesterday, and there was a speaker who just floored me, blew my mind. And I told her that. I said, my world has been rocked after she was done, because she talked about 100 days and what you do. And she became a YouTube sensation, a sensation. Did a TED talk, and it was about overcoming 100 fears in 100 days. And she did everything from eating cockroaches to dancing by herself like nobody's watching in Times Square, to jumping off a cliff, to skydiving. And her last 100th fear was giving that TED talk,
Wow.
public speaking. And so I draw that back. And I was thinking about this, listening to it yesterday, because I was thinking about this podcast, that, that's actually what guides do. You think
Mhm.
about the 100 things that she uncovered, the 100 fears. And I was checking off the list what guides have had to do, from going up in a hot air balloon to bungee jumping to skydiving to, and to a certain degree, obviously, but public speaking, fear
Right.
of rejection, right? So public speaking, when you're with clients, you're talking, you're lecturing, you are both teacher, you are
Mhm.
both guide, you are part uh, safety net, you are part leader, you are
Mhm.
part friend, you are part, I mean, part family. I mean, it's across the board.
Mhm.
And I was just thinking, you know, a guide, a really good guide, accomplishes these fears on every single assignment. And some of them will work for 6 weeks straight.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think about that?
It's hard, and I can relate to it because when I worked in tourism on boats, and I that 6 week straight part is hard because you're leaving it out all out there, and you're you have to be careful about making sure that you save something for yourself. But what I find fascinating when you're talking about the fears, I could relate to this
Yeah,
because people would ask me questions, and even though I might be an expert in that destination,
right,
I would freeze. Like I would forget everything I knew. It is really a very a person has to be really just I don't know. I think it doesn't come naturally to everyone,
right.
which is what I'm trying to say. And
Yeah.
so, it's hard to find those people that have that natural talent. Does in Egypt are guides required to have a certification in order to be a guide or?
They're required to have a guiding license, which requires a level of certification, but
Mhm.
they're not required to be Egyptologists. They choose to be them. And that's
Mm.
that's the interesting thing, right? You go to most countries and the guide will have to get the guiding license, have to pass exams, go to school. But then there's one cut above, and I draw this, so you've talked to Leon, one of our guides in Colombia, for example,
Mhm.
and he's gone to school for this and really took it upon himself over and above what was required to make himself a great guide. It's the same thing with Egyptologists, right? One of our guides is Ahmed Negi. Another one is Wafika. So there's a bunch of them there that just have this experience, this feel,
Mhm.
where they've become something else, right? They've become something else, but they choose to go over and above. And I think that's something that's pretty powerful. And what you said just now, you're on that ship, so it's even harder for you. You know, captain or not, you have nowhere to hide. It's not like you can go
Mhm.
home or you can, get in a car and drive off, or, let's say somebody doesn't get along with you. I'd like to change the guide. How do you change somebody off of an expedition ship? I mean, you're kind of stuck with each other.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's the same thing with finding that balance, right? Travel companies have to find that balance between where the client's interests and the right guide. But then the guides also got to walk that delicate balance of, being a teacher and also being somebody who's considered a friend at the exact same time. And I think
Mhm.
that's key. That's powerful. Something that I wanted to ask you. Have you ever did you ever get wowed by a guide when you were working on the expedition ship, when you were working on there? Was there ever a guide on that boat that just absolutely just floored you because you walked away and said he or she was the person that just absolutely changed your life because of how good they were?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And as a shipmate, some of these I would just sit in awe. They a guide can make or break the entire operation. It's
Right,
not just about it. The guide is the forward part of the experience for
right,
everyone. And
right,
we were all standing on the back of the guide. So if the guide, in our case, it was an expedition leader, there were so many that I had such deep admiration for. But then even as a traveler, what I remember from many of the destinations I visited is the guide, and
right,
the destination is second behind,
right.
that. It's that human connection. Um,
You said it. That human connection is
yeah.
exactly right. I was just thinking about this, right? So you come off of an airplane or you get onto a boat and you're meeting somebody for the first time. it takes a long time to forge lifelong friendships.
Mm-hmm.
You meet somebody, let's say you meet somebody in school, or you meet somebody through a career. It takes a while. It takes months, weeks, years sometimes to forge a friendship. I've got a couple of friends from college, for example, that one of them I haven't seen hadn't seen in 20 years. And when we saw each other again, we picked up right where we left off.
Mm-hmm.
We went gorilla trekking together and everything and whatnot. And it's amazing because you can see the right guides in a matter of 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
You form a bond that normally takes years to form, right? You're inviting this person into their house. You have no idea about their private life, but they're opening it up to you and they're sharing with you. And the more they share about their vulnerabilities and what life is like, the more they share that, the more they become endeared to you, the more they become part of your inner circle. And it's amazing when I see these guides and what they do and the fact that they actually form this bond and become basically a family friend or part of the family in 10, 12, 14 days, sometimes in 5 days, in different places, sometimes just a couple of days to come back and say, this person was absolutely amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And you go and find out the material is not really any different, right? The pyramid looks the exact same, no matter who you go with. It's how it's explained to you, how humanized the conversation is versus how sterile it is, right? Do you feel like you're back in college, listen to a lecturer, in some cases drone on, or in some cases really teach you something? Or are you listening to somebody who's saying, hey, come, I want to show you something. Come with me. I want to show you this something. This is what I remembered. And this is that. And the right Egyptologist has those key qualities. There's a couple that I've traveled with that just have blown my mind, right? There's only a handful that I travel with, I work with, that I just trust, and they blew my mind because it was just that. In a matter of 10 days, I've watched my wife, my kids just endear to them, become endeared to them, just make them part of the family, and I would sit back in awe and go, it takes a father decades to get that bond with his daughter. I mean, decades. Right. I mean, right now I'm still on the outer circle of my daughter, and I'm entering that phase where I'm gonna be her best friend, but it's a limited window. I go from dad to best friend back to dad.
Yeah.
And this person in 4 days and 5 days accomplished what I'm still trying to accomplish with my own daughter.
Right. Right. I get that. One of the things that I think that the guide also does is it helps if you're traveling with a group, if you don't have a private guide, let's say you're traveling with a few people, they are that icebreaker. They are that bond that gets everyone else to open up. Travel is very stressful. I remember thinking, I will not marry someone until I've traveled with them, because you see the true colors of someone when they travel,
That's actually
right?
really good.
It's for real. Like the worst of you comes out when all your vulnerabilities are there. And so the right guide, though, can take all that stress away instantly. It melts away. You feel safe. You feel comfortable. And sometimes I think, I mean, yes, eventually you get around to understanding and taking in their knowledge. But at first it's like this, they have to be this comforting presence and just make you know that everything will be okay.
I'm still chuckling at honeymoon because I'm just at traveling together, because the first thought I thought of is the honeymoon should happen before the wedding, not after.
For real.
It's for real. We got engaged. Let's go on a honeymoon first to make sure you're not a sleazebag.
Yeah.
Let's go on a honeymoon
you're not
first
going to scream at me in the airport because we're not going to make our connection,
Exactly. And you know what? I think they should do that with kids too. When they're newborns, or when they're two. Actually, when they're two. There should be a rule that when they're two, you walk through an airport with a kid, and if the kid screams out, that's when you know, this is not going to work. This is not going to work.
I need to exchange this child will never be
Not to digress, but I'm just thinking about you just opened up a really unique idea. You're right. When you travel with people that you want to spend time with, you get to know who they really are. And I was just thinking, like, okay, what if there's a pool for kids, and at 2 years old, you're traveling through an air, like one of my kids did. I had left for a business trip. My poor wife was going back with them. And in the middle of the airport, just plops down and says, "You're the worst mother ever." It just screams it out and whatnot. And she just walks on and goes, "Okay, I'm going to let you calm down." I'm just thinking, like, at what point do you go, you know what, son, this isn't gonna work.
Yeah. You are clearly not my child. You're not a
No,
child.
yeah.
We can't do this anymore. You're
Yeah,
gonna,
yeah. It's not you, it's
yeah.
me.
Yeah. But a great guide, that's the thing, is like if you
Right,
get a great guide, all those little, because adults have temper tantrums and
right.
travel crisis and all that kind of thing. And so they do
I-
have to,
I'll never forget. I'll never forget. I had one guide that I worked with in India years ago. He doesn't. I don't think he guides anymore. And um, it was something really unique. There was a psychologist and his bride, and every morning she would be crying,
oh,
and she'd be crying every morning because they would just go back and argue,
oh,
afterwards, just like this, and just unpleasant. And but then when they were touring, they'd be fine. And eventually he would kind of, just try to change the topic and go there. And then all of a sudden, midway through, he goes, enough. He goes to her and he goes, why are you making her cry? What are you
wow.
doing? Why are you making her
Yeah.
cry? Look at where you are. You're in India. Look at what you're looking at. When are you going to get back here again? You can argue until the cows come home when you get back. But for
Hmm.
this period right here, and he said this, he goes, think of me as your son. I care about both of you, and I want to see both of you smile and be happy. He could have literally just phoned and said, I'm out.
Yeah.
Deuces.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. These people are impossible.
Yeah.
This is not
But
going to
he
work.
did that, and I was like, wow. I'll throw a different topic in, and this applies. Actually, didn't happen in Egypt, but I still scarred me. Um, we had this was New Year's Eve. This was some years ago. There was a mother and a daughter, and the husband was supposed to go too, and he did end up canceling. It was a mother and a daughter that went to Argentina. They showed up in Chile and Argentina, and they were in the beautiful parts in Chile. And for some reason, they weren't feeling the lodge. Like, the guide is okay, whatnot. And I knew the guide. I'm like, how can the guide be okay? This guide is a rock star. I've traveled with
Mm-hmm.
him before. He's amazing. How can it be that? And then they got to Argentina, and the guide in Argentina, she was a godsend. She contacted me and said, "Listen, have you seen these people?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "No, have you seen them?" I'm like, "Yeah, I know their face." He goes, "No, no, no. Have you seen them?" I said, "No." He said, "Listen, I just found out." He goes, "As a woman," she said that, she goes, "As a woman, I found out why the husband didn't come. She showed up here. She's got bruises all over her face. She was wearing big, thick sunglasses, and shame on her mother because her mother was there too and was allowing it to happen.
Wow.
But she had bruises all over her face, and that's why she didn't like the guide. And so she got to Chile, and the guide is, this guide in particular he's a very happy, fun-loving guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's a very happy. And when you're going through that, to
Mm-hmm.
have somebody who's happy and seems like they have their life all together, it almost feels like resentful at a certain degree. And so she
Yeah.
got there, and it was my heart dropped.
Wow.
How can somebody do this, first of all,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So how can somebody even behave like this to do this to a woman, first of all, let alone to your wife?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Secondly, it was, what kind of trauma and what kind of scarring did this woman have, and how strong must she be that she still carried forward to this trip? And no matter what, I'm sure people must have said something under their breath, seen her. She tried to cover up the bruises as best she could, but it took out another woman to see this.
Mm-hmm.
And how strong must she be that she held her head up and said, no, I'm gonna, so she ended up having that period. She ended up having a great time because we
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to do everything to get her to forget where she was from. But that guide
Jeez.
made it happen because she uncovered it. And that's the other part of it. The guides have to uncover the idiosyncrasies of each and every party, whether it's a group or private trip or whatnot. It's the skeletons in the closet that come
Yeah.
out of every trip.
Yeah.
It's the skeletons in the closet that you wouldn't repeat to anybody in public, and they come out whether you want them
Mm-hmm.
to or not in conversation. The guide will explain something, and the client might just randomly burst out into tears.
Yeah.
And why is that? All because a relative succumbed to cancer, or because of this happened, or because of that happened. And that's the thing. This just happened in Egypt actually recently. I was traveling with somebody I admire him as a father. I admire him unbelievably. We share a love of college basketball, and he's a 6'6" guy. He's like a jolly green giant. His son is battling all sorts of cancer.
Mm.
It went into remission. Now it's come back. He's had pieces of his liver removed, his intestine removed. I mean, it's bad. And yet this kid is just fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And this guy is there. And I remember we went to this, what we were talking about, the local archaeologists, like the last episode, and he was with me, and he had watched this documentary we were talking about last time, right? About that secret tomb and everything else. He had watched it. He recognized all the workers from the documentary. He goes, I know
Oh,
you were on
wow.
TV. I know you were on the documentary. I know you were here. How does this person retain all this information? And I was looking at our Egyptologist, and he was just, yes, as a father, you have this. And he walked up to me and said, I have 4 children. This is the guide. I have 4 children. He goes, and you have I think he said 2. I have 4 children. And the guy said, he goes, I hope one day I can be as strong as you. And
Oh,
the guy, my friend, the guy I was traveling with, he starts getting emotional. And over somewhere along the way, we overheard that he likes playing the harmonica. So the
oh,
guide went and found him a harmonica, which is hard to find in Egypt, by the way.
I
I don't know
bet.
where you find it.
Yeah.
Somehow found a harmonica, delivered it to him, and said, when you come back with your son, we're playing this harmonica together. All of a sudden, this is a guide who has known this person at this point for 5 days, has now made this profound impact, and also given this father and his ailing son a purpose that no doctor could ever give, a purpose that no priest could ever give. This person did it, and it took him 5 days to do what people can't do in 2 years.
Like,
It was incredible.
they're also healers. We're going to add that to
We're
the
going to
list.
add that as well. They're healers. Yes.
As you're telling me all that, I'm thinking, in addition to just having to be empaths and really tailor to whoever their guests are, do you think culturally, do you think they have to adapt to, do they have to guide an American different than they would guide a Brit because I know when I worked on boats, when we would get Australians on or New Zealand's on, and actually for that matter, Texans, they travel differently. They live, they see life differently. And it was always fun. We actually loved having Texans and Australians together because they had all that big energy. But do you think culturally a guide has to adapt to
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And I'll use the Egyptologist I travel with. His name is Ahmed in Egypt. He just amazes me. He does. Not only does he behave differently based on them, he taught himself French. So he speaks Arabic, he speaks English, he speaks French, he's working on Spanish now. And it's essentially because he wants to learn local dialect, right? He can speak in Arabic, obviously. He can speak in English, obviously. But he said, yes. He goes, if I get somebody from Europe, I'll ask them. He goes, it's not just the French. He goes, this is the part that amazes me. He goes, if I get somebody from Europe, he goes, you'd be surprised how many people in Europe speak French. Doesn't matter what part of the country they're from, or part of the region, excuse me, what part of the continent they're from. Whether they're from Germany, whether they're from Spain, whether they're from Amsterdam, whatever the case, doesn't matter whether it's London, Paris, Belgium, doesn't matter, right? He'll ask, do you speak Spanish? Do you speak French? And he said when he asked that, he is amazed by how many times he hears back. Somebody who is from Luxembourg speaks French. Somebody who is from a remote town in Germany speaks French. Somebody who's from the Netherlands speaks French. What got me is that he said, I've not had any too many people from Scandinavian countries, but he's had a few guests from Norway who spoke French.
Wow.
It's, and I know that's a rarity. But the fact that he asks it, and then on top of that, then uses his French, which I know is not going to be perfect dialect, right? And again, just like any language, right? You speak French in different countries. You speak French in Morocco, it's different from how you speak it in France to how you speak it somewhere else, how you speak it in Haiti. It's a different dialect. And he yet understands that and puts himself out. The vulnerabilities you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
He put himself out. So yes, I think they have to behave differently, but what I would add to that is that it's not behaving where they're turning things off. They're actually adding other dimensions. The part about the healer and the friend and the teacher, that all stays. But they're adding other dimensions to it because they're now morphing themselves. I mean, they're like chameleons, right? They're morphing themselves to become more relevant and more relatable with the people they're traveling with because they're in a vehicle together. they're touring together. They're going to be together for 10 hours a day, 8 hours a day. It's like your job. You're together with people more at work than you are at home. So you might as well find a way to get along. And
Yeah.
it's just that aspect of it, which is just key, really, really special.
Yeah. What is I think about how do they bring up the next generation of guides, especially like in Egypt and Egyptologists. Are you finding that I know after the pandemic, there's some guides that didn't come back.
Yep.
Are you finding it harder and harder to find good guides, especially in Egypt?
So this is actually the $1,000,000 question. I'm glad you asked this question because, and this wasn't even in our prep, but this is the question that is really, it's the right question. It is the right question. I was just talking about this to somebody yesterday. We were talking about Japan. There were over 2,000 guides in Japan before the pandemic. There's now 900. The rest of them have gone and not come back. And again, we talked about this on another episode and previous episodes, even before you and I were co-hosting this, where I would argue that governments didn't get this right. Put the health aside. They didn't understand the true fallout of a lack of tourism, of people giving up what they love to do, but they're not coming back, just giving it up, period, and going to take a job that they don't want to take, but they have to take, and then saying, you know what, I don't want to go back to that because I can't go through that struggle again. You compare that to a place like Egypt. Through the Arab Spring, through the revolution, through the pandemic, none of the Egyptologists left. Some retired. None of them left. There is a pride in their work. And I would argue Egypt did this better than most countries. Before they opened their borders back up during the pandemic, they opened their borders for domestic travel. And then the president and the government laid out a plan and basically a mandate to the Egyptian people to say, go and explore your own country. Morocco did it to a certain degree as well, but not like Egypt. Go and explore your own country. Go and explore, and people were going out, and Egyptologists were going out, and I went out here and I learned here and I did this. There's a sense of pride. They wear their Egyptologist as a badge of honor. Like I'm an Egyptologist. I'm not a guide. I'm an Egyptologist, and they're so proud of it, and they love what they do. And I mean, Ahmed, for example, like one of our guides, Manal, I call her Auntie Manal. She comes back. I was having dinner. She stopped. She goes, I have to see you. I had to come and see you. I knew you were here. I had to come and see you. She goes, and then she says things like, God bless you. And I had to come and see my child. I had to come and see this. And I hugged her like I would hug my mother. And I've known her for a while, but I've hugged her like I hug my mother. When I see Ahmed, my brother, it's good to see you. I'm Hindu, he's Muslim. If you go back to the political spectrum of the world, we probably shouldn't be getting along. And yet here we are calling each other brother. My mom is from Sudan. When she goes there, my brother, my sister, it's amazing. So the countries, and I would say the answer to your question is that the countries, and if any dignitary or delegate is listening to this podcast, please contact me. I'll give you the roadmap. I'll lay this out for you in as plain terms as I can, because I've seen this in country after country after country after country. It's not rocket science. It is simply a case where a country has to make the idea of working in tourism, specifically as a guide, who is really the face of your country, right? When you look at a country, it's indigenous communities. We talk about guides, but guides are from those indigenous communities. You're not going to Egypt and having a guide who's coming from London. You could, but you're not. You're talking to Egyptologist who was born and raised there. You go to Peru, you're talking to guides who are descendants of Incas, who are telling you about their heritage, which means they're part of the indigenous community. This is the face of your country. It's not you, the world leader. It's not your government. It's not your policies. It's them. And everybody who lives with them and is connected to them, that's who it is. And if you want to make guiding a popular profession, then do what Egypt did. Do what Egypt did. Make it a profession that is revered. And reverence does not mean money.
Well, that was my next question.
Yep.
Are they adequately compensated?
Not every place.
Yeah.
You know, in this country, we have an issue with teachers and how teachers are compensated, and it's honestly not anywhere near enough. I would argue it's the same thing with guides. You know, in terms of how guides behave and do different things, and you know, not everywhere. You know, one of the biggest challenges that guides that certain countries face with guides, and we face it too, is, you know, this balance between getting commissions from shopping and tips and whatnot. I just had this in one particular country where the amount of tips that are being requested by the guide was just exorbitant. And it wasn't the guide's fault, it's the country's fault. It's the system where they were being told that, here, make your money from this. They're not some beggar on the street. They're not some second-class citizen. These are people who international travelers visit and consider them as part of your family within days. They accomplish in days and weeks what takes all of us in our families years to do. Right? And yet a country is telling them, well, guidelines this, but you go ahead. In one particular country, I know in Morocco, for a while there, if you're a guide or a driver, certain companies wouldn't pay allowances to stay overnight somewhere. So,
oh, you're kidding. So they're
yes.
traveling along with people, but they are not being provided
So they slept in the car.
accommodations?
So they slept in the car. And I remember when I saw this, I was like, no. These are not dogs. These are not pets. These are people. So forget about being guides. This is from a humanitarian standpoint. No. That's just not okay. And I think this is important, because whenever a traveler will see a country and say, well, that seems kind of expensive. Okay, where's the money going? It's going to your guides. It's going to the taxes. It's going to the place. The hotel cost is the hotel cost.
Right.
But then your land cost, which is the vehicle, which is the driver, which is the taxes, which is your guide, which is the entry fees. The guide is the lion's share of that. When you look at a place and you say, no, I want to wait for a discount, wait for a sale, what you're essentially saying is, I want to wait so I can pay a guide less money than they're worth.
Yeah.
This is their profession. This is not their hobby. Right. And again, we can't forget, we talk about big successes in small places. What bigger success is there than a guy who this? I'll tell you this story, and this happened very early on in my career. It was a mother and a daughter that were estranged. They had not talked for years, and they had planned a trip to try to reunite their relationship, to try to reconnect. They planned a trip to Kenya. I'll never forget this. And it was the mother and it was the daughter. They hadn't, and it wasn't like estranged for months, years. They had not talked for years. The father had passed away. It was just the two of them that were left in the family, and they had not talked for years. They got on the trip, and there's no TVs on safari. There's just conversations. And they started seeing, the guides were talking looking at the stars and showing them how they trace their ancestors. They're looking at how their grandfather taught them how they track lion movements and everything else. Next thing you know, they reconnected. True story. 2 months after that trip, the daughter was killed in a car accident. 2 months after that trip. What if that trip hadn't happened? What if that guide hadn't done what he or she was doing? In this case, it was a guide in the camp in the Masai Mara. What if those people had not done that, right? And when I say guide, I'm also talking about the people that meet you at the airport when you first land there, the person who's greeting you with a smile, the person who's solving your problems if you don't like your room, the person at the front desk who's actually helping you, the person who's cleaning your bathrooms, the person who's doing, there's every bit of it. But they're all driven by the guide. If you approach a country and you have an amazing connection with your guide, everything around you is better. You treat the people that clean your room better. You treat the people that carry your bags better. You treat the person that drives to the airport better. You treat the gate agent at the airport better. You treat everybody around you better. And I tell everybody that will listen to me, and anybody who is a world traveler listening to us right now, I cannot stress this enough. This is the thing that I cannot stress enough. You have to travel, and you have to embrace your guide as if you were that mother and daughter. Because you don't know when this is going to be over. You don't know when you're not going to be able to do this anymore. You don't know. We don't have control over when our clock stops. I know there's tons of apps about when our clock, look, we don't have control over that. All right. You can call it fate. You can call it almighty. You can call it destiny, whatever you want to call it. We don't have control over that. Do you really want to spend that time nickel and diming the person who is the face of the country you're visiting, who is the person who's going to be your closest, what I'm looking for?
Connection, I guess. I mean, I think like
Yes,
they are your bridge truly into the country, because there's a lot of people that don't even travel with guides, that
correct,
DIY,
correct.
that never really truly connect with
But
the
even those
destination.
DIYs, they'll meet somebody
Yeah,
who'll
that's true.
connect, who'll do this, who'll
Hmm.
do that. I would, and I say this whenever I go somewhere and they, I'll talk to somebody in a party or whatever. Oh, I traveled here. The guide was amazing. It was great. It was good. Or they'll say the trip was great. How was the
Hmm.
guide? Oh, the guide was good. And then I'll say, okay, how did you plan this? I don't care how they booked it, who they booked with. How did you
Yeah.
plan it? And then when they start saying, well, they had their sale happening, I walk away. I literally get up and
Right.
walk away. And they go, why are you walking away? I said, I cannot be part of this conversation because you have no idea how much effort it comes in, and you have marginalized. And you've heard me talk about this. I've been marginalized more times than I can count in my own life. And
Hmm.
I have a special place for people who feel marginalized because nobody should be. And
Right.
guides in particular there's no bigger hero in a country
Right.
than this. This was, I mean, it's just in Egypt, right? I mean, I remember when we had gone down to this tomb with the local archaeologist, Ahmed was with us, and he came up and he said, I have been reading about this. I've been seeing all these things. He said, today you made me so proud to be an Egyptian because of what I saw. And just to feel like I had this impact on his life. This
Right.
is somebody who is revered, and I
Yeah.
had this impact on him. I mean, how do you stop that? How do you top that?
Yeah.
So
Right.
to anybody who's listening, if you're a deal chaser, don't come back and say, oh, we love the people. You don't. I hate to be blunt, but you don't.
Yeah.
You can't be that and also this. You got to pick one,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not saying that you overpay for something. I'm not talking about that. But you can't turn around and say, I'm a deal, I'm a deal finder. And then turn around and say, well, I just bought a new Rolex,
Yeah. Right.
or I just bought a new hypercar, or whatever the case. It doesn't work that way. And I'm not stereotyping any one person, but I just want you to think about this for a second. Do you know there was a guide that I had in I mean this was one of the guides in Egypt that I've talked to, and he talked about his upbringing and where he was, and he lost his father during the Arab-Israeli War.
Mm.
And he talked about that. And he makes it part of his story. Leon in Bogota, his cousin was kidnapped by the FARCs when they were in control, by the guerrillas when they were in
Oh,
control
wow.
in Colombia. There's another guide another guide in another part. I think it was in Colombia, in Caño Costadas. When he was 5 years old, this is in Colombia. His parents would used to strap kilo bags of cocaine to his leg and put his pants over it. And he was the mule that would take the drugs across the border into our country. That's when they were
Wow.
5. They have stories to tell. The
Mm.
question is, do you respect them enough to tell the story, or do you just see them as a commodity? You know,
Right.
there's a difference,
There
right?
is a difference.
If you see them as a commodity, I mean, anybody who's listening to this podcast, if you disagree with what I'm saying, you should stop listening right now, because you're not going to like what comes out of my mouth in the future episodes. But if you do agree with this, then keep listening, because this is what we talk about day in and day out.
Yeah. So I feel like, when we travel, we pick our destination, but we probably, so guides are probably the last thing you choose when you travel, right? Like that's the last thing, like you've got it all set and you're like, oh, I guess I need somebody to. So we probably should flip that on its head and start
The guide.
with the guide, and
Yeah.
then we work our way into what we're going to do, and
Well,
give
Simon
them a roadmap.
Simon Sinek, the author, talks about start with why, and
Hmm.
I agree with that, but I would argue start with who is equally important.
For sure.
Now, if he's listening, I'm sure he's going to come to me and say, no, 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 hold on a second, you can't say that. That's copyright infringement. But I'm just saying, the who is equally important. I mean,
Hmm.
you can tell. I mean, you're a passionate person about this. I'm a passionate person about this. I can talk for hours about this. I mean, I think if there was ever an episode or a contest as to who can keep a marathon podcast going for the longest, you and I would probably win.
Probably so. And enjoy every minute of it.
And enjoy every minute of it. Exactly. Until somebody says 10-4, good buddy, come on back.
That's right. Which, and I know we need to wrap it up, but as you're sitting here telling me this, I just came back from Las Vegas, which was just, a silly trip that I did. But you know what I remember the most? My Uber driver and my connection with him on the way to the airport. Of my entire time that I spent there, that was what touched me the most.
Yeah. Where was he from?
He was from the Philippines.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
But I got his whole life story.
And how long was the drive? How long was the drive?
20 minutes.
20 minutes. You
Mhm.
got his life story in
Mhm.
20 minutes. And I guarantee you that if you were to talk to somebody that you made a friend in 20 minutes, just randomly here, they're not going to unearth their skeletons in their closet in 20 minutes. And this man, or this woman, I guess it was a man or a woman.
It was a man, yeah.
And he did it in 20 minutes. And he probably did it with pride.
He did.
There you go.
Absolute 100%.
There you go. So they were so really the parting message on this episode is, as our listeners travel the world, who? Pay attention to who, and pay attention to those connections, because they're happening. They're happening. The question is whether you see it or not, but they are happening. If you are too worried about where you're sitting on an airplane versus the connection on ground, that's there you go.
Yeah.
There's a different story.
All right. This was fun.
This
Where are
was
we going
wonderful.
next?
I don't know, actually. Where are we going next?
I guess
That's
I need to look.
need to look. Where are we going next? Hang on. That's a great question. I know I was excited about it.
I know, me too.
Where are we heading next? Let's see. We it was something really cool that
It was. Hold on, I'm gonna find it. Let's see. Now it's
we're going to Peru next.
Peru. That's what I thought.
We're going to Peru
I'm
next.
excited about Peru.
And we're talking about fixing a broken economy through tourism. And it's going to be really, really cool. I'm going to see, we've got a couple of episodes in Peru. I'm going to see if we can get Chris on one of these episodes.
I'd love that.
That'll be cool. He's, you know what, there's one person who's as straight as it comes when it comes to politics in Peru. It's him.
Yeah.
And honestly, his take when he starts talking, who needs a daily show when you need him? When you have him, honestly, it's hilarious.
Yeah, he's a good guy. That's going to be fun.
I'll ask him. I think we'll talk to him, but this was fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
This was, we told everybody that the two of us paired up together in this podcast was going to be like something the world's never seen. I think we're starting to prove that already.
Right? Yes.
That's awesome.
Now I want to get on. Yeah, I don't know. I'll try to be back in 2 weeks. I might be having to head off to Egypt here real quick.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, at some point, I think we're going to have to be in different parts of the world and start doing pulling our whole Today Show replica where we're basically broadcasting from today's part. But I will not be Matt Lauer. Don't call me Matt Lauer. I refuse to be him.
Never.
Never. I'll be Al Roker before I'm Matt Lauer.
Oh my God. All right. Ashish. And on that note.
Till next time, guys, thanks for joining us on Sustainable Voice.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Sustainable Voice. If you have a success story of your own, please reach out and share it with us. We'd love to hear from you. See you next time.